Okay, so welcome to tonight's livestock webinar series on caring for your new chicks. This is definitely one of my favorite presentations to give. It's always very exciting to get those chicks and to raise them. Most of the time, folks are wanting to raise them for laying production to have their own eggs. But even if you're raising them for meat, it's still a very exciting time to get those chicks. You want to make sure that you do everything correctly so that you don't lose any of them. So let's get started. And just as a reminder, this is going to be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. And after this is over, either tonight or tomorrow, I will email out that recording link as well as a link to a Google Drive folder with handouts and a short evaluation that I would greatly appreciate you completing. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window and we will do a Q&A at the end. Okay, so this is kind of the different topics we're going to dive into tonight. Nothing too far in depth, but a good broad overview so that you can get your chicks off on the right foot and you can make sure that they make it into adulthood and are very productive and healthy. So we're going to talk about purchasing chicks, taking chicks home, brooding, nutrition, housing, egg production, flock health, and pest management. Okay, so everything starts with purchasing chicks. You want to make sure that you're sourcing your chicks correctly so that you don't end up with a disaster. And unfortunately, I get several phone calls every single year, where folks have purchased birds and, things happen. And they're asking me, what went wrong or what should I have done differently? And I'm like, it's all about where you're sourcing those chicks from. So consider that source. Where were you thinking about getting chicks from, or where did you get chicks from? Was it a local breeder, a farm supply store, or was it a hatchery? Think about the stress level on chicks. So those chicks that are in the feed stores, lots of people are around those chicks. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot going on. And depending on if people can touch them or not, again, a lot of stress going on with those chicks. Reputation. So if you are buying straight from a breeder, straight from a hatchery, or you ask that farm supply store where did they get those chicks, I would look into the reputation of that source. How well do they take care of their breeder flocks? What's their guarantee on chicks? That sort of thing. Health guarantee, how are they raised and started? Are they NPIP certified? So most of these hatcheries are going to be NPIP certified because they're going to follow a certain standard. They're going to test, make sure there's disease prevention measures. They're going to vaccinate. They're going to follow, these guidelines. I think it's put forth by the USDA. So that's something to look for because that's a really good set of guidelines out there that those hatcheries are following. And even some breeders look to be NPIP certified so that they can have that quality assurance on that. Are they vaccinated? I highly recommend you get vaccinated chicks. I had a lady call me last year that was starting to have issues, and once we started talking, her chicks weren't vaccinated, and everything kind of pegged to them having a disease that could have been preventable. So vaccination is key, because if there is a vaccine for the particular type of disease or concern, like coccidiosis, it's another tool in your toolbox to hopefully prevent anything from going wrong. So I know Merrick's is a big one that the hatcheries will offer up a vaccination for. And then I really recommend coccidiosis, because these things are just out of your control. So another preventative step in there is really helpful. Do they have a chick guarantee? I kind of talked about that a little bit. Typically, whenever you work with probably either a local breeder or hatchery, they're probably going to have a chick guarantee. The farm supply store is probably going to vary from store to store and how they do that. Choose a breed to fit your interests and goals. So if you want a really easygoing, laid back, laying hen, you definitely don't want to go after certain breeds. You want to research. There's a lot of charts out there that will tell you kind of the docility level of those birds. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the Buff Orpingtons, just off the top of my head, they are just the most easygoing, laid back breed I probably have ever been around. And then there's other breeds. I'm having just a brain fart here. I can't think of the names, but there's other breeds out there. They're just a little more flightier, and they're just not as easy to be around. So, are there kids involved, with the chickens, things like that, and then also, do you want a dual purpose bird? Do you want a heavier type bird? Do you want more of a meat type bird? Those kind of things. So definitely research your breeds. Don't just get a chicken because it's pretty. Some of those don't lay well. They don't do well if they're just kind of a novelty breed. What are those end goals for your chickens? Cost. When you're ordering chickens, if you want females, you want a rare breed, and you're wanting just 5 of them, expect to pay quite a bit per chick for that kind of scenario. If you're willing to take a straight run, which is males and females, popular breeds, and bulk ordering, say you and a neighbor go in together and y'all can put together, 20 or 50 chicks or something like that, you can definitely get them at a cheaper price. But you've got to figure out what you're going to do with all those roosters. A lot of folks don't want roosters unless you have a plan for meat or something like that, or a partnership with somebody who will take them. Your better bet is to order females. Just know when you order females, you still might get a male. It still happens, but it's not nearly as much as if you get straight run. So taking the chicks home, if you go pick up chicks, from a feed store, a lot of times they have boxes available for you to take those chicks home in. If you, get them in the mail through a hatchery, again, they're going to have a box already. But if you are going and picking them up from somewhere, say a breeder or something like that, make sure that you do have your box or your container. It doesn't need to be anything big because you don't want them sliding around or anything like that. Make sure that you do not put them in front of vents. I know it seems silly and, like it might not happen kind of thing, but it does. I put stuff in here because it happens. Don't put them in front of the vents because of drafts. It can chill them or overheat them. I mean, they just have no temperature regulation at this point. So anything can cause stress and put them into shock. You want to have material for stable footing. So make sure that they are not just put into a bare box or a bare container. You want to have shredded newspaper, shavings, or like an old towel. And that way they're not sliding around. You don't end up with a broken leg, something like that. And believe it or not, it happens. So make sure that you're prepared to transport them. For your brooding equipment, so before you get your chicks, before you bring them home, make sure you go ahead and get all your brooding stuff set up. You want to make sure that you have a heat source, a thermometer. You definitely don't want to guess on the temperature, so it's best to have a thermometer that you can put on the floor so you can read the temperature. A box or container can be plastic, cardboard, wood, etc. You can repurpose stuff. So I'll show some pictures of that. And you can see this picture here is like an old water trough. If you have a water trough that has a leak in it or something like that, it's great to repurpose those pieces of equipment. Water containers, feed and feed containers, and then your bedding. Again, you'd like the shredded newspaper or shavings. You really do not want sawdust. That can end up, causing respiratory issues. So the bigger, fluffier type shavings, and do not get cedar shavings. So you see them here, just the regular white type of shavings works well, or those shredded newspaper. Okay, so here's some pictures of some brooding boxes. that work really, really well. If you have a dog kennel, that can work well as long as you line it with cardboard so they do not feel a draft of any sort and that the heat can stay right there with them. You have to be careful anytime you're involving cardboard or plastic with heat, obviously. So make sure it's not touching the cardboard, it's not too hot on the cardboard. This one's hung right in the middle, which works really well, and you can see kind of how they did that. Again, those water troughs are perfect. You can lay a bar over the top here and hang your lamp, or I've even seen people straddle a ladder over top and they can drop down the lamp over it that way, or it can clamp on the side if you get one with a clamp. This is just a cardboard box. It's clamped on the side. Again, you got to be careful about that heat source. And then here's one down here with a Rubbermaid tub. We use these a lot in our office when we do embryology with the 4-H projects, and they work really well. You do have to, again, be cautious about the plastic. This one has a top over it, so anytime you have pets or children, you want to have a top on your brooder box if it's, you know, accessible to them, like in your house or garage or things like that, because you don't want your cat or your dog or your children harassing the chicks, and that can be a huge stressor for them. Okay, and I have on here, I'll have some prices and things like that. So last time I checked, you know, lamps were $7.99 plus, just to kind of give you an idea of some cost. Okay, so brooding, you want a 2 foot by 2 foot box that's 12 to 15 inches high. That's adequate for up to 12 chicks, so it's not a huge space. And then you just kind of go a little bit bigger from there, depending on how many chicks you have. Again, cover the top with that wire mesh to restrict handling and protect from predators and pets. You want to mount that reflective light with a 100-watt bulb about 8 inches above the floor of the box. And then you want to place a thermometer on the floor of the box, and it should read 95 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to reduce the temperature 5 degrees each week by adjusting the lamp until room temperature is reached. So that's, again, if you can have like a ladder or bar or something, you can easily adjust height. So that works really well. You want to brood the chicks for 4 to 6 weeks until their feathers come in and they can regulate their own temperature. Okay, so you can learn a lot about how well you're doing with your heat and brooding the chicks by their behavior. So these are some of the photos here that, you know, you can kind of look for. If the temperature is too high, the heat source is in the middle of all these pictures. If the temperature is too high, they're going to be spread to the walls, scattered out. They'll be making no noise. They're panting. Their head and wings droop. And they're away from the brooder lamp. If the temperature is correct, they will be evenly spaced around, and you know, their noise level will signify contentment. So they'll just have kind of a nice little chirp. If the temperature is too low, they're going to be crowded up underneath the heat source, and they're going to be very noisy, kind of distress calling. And then if there is a draft or an uneven temperature distribution, they're going to be to one side of that brooder box. Okay, so let's talk about nutrition. It's really, really, really important that you get them started off on the right foot. So hatching to 8 weeks old, they need to be on the chick starter feed. This feed is going to be higher in protein, like 18 to 20%, and I highly recommend that it's medicated with a coccidiostat to prevent coccidiosis. Which is an intestinal disease that will cause death. It's in the environment, it's in their gut typically, and it comes out with stress. Stress can be from shipping, from being overhandled, you know, other environmental things going on. So it's not necessarily something that you can prevent unless you add those, what I say, the tools in the toolbox. So that would be having them vaccinated and then having medicated feed with a coccidiostat in it. 8 to 12 weeks old, they can go on a grower feed, which is 15% protein. And then 12 to 21 weeks old, they can go to a developer feed or keep using the grower feed. So it's going to back them down on protein a little bit. Then when they hit around 21 weeks and older, they should start laying, or they're getting really close to laying. If you're, if you have layer chickens, you want to put them on a layer feed plus a calcium supplement. So it's going to bump them back up. So it'll give them 16 to 18% protein. And then that calcium supplement is going to help them when they are forming, eggs and pulling quite a bit of calcium from their body. If you do not have them on a layer feed with a calcium supplement, they will actually pull nutrients from their bones and from their body that's not there for them to take, honestly. So it'll just it'll really hurt them if they're not on the correct diet, and they're not going to lay well, and they're not going to do well. So it's important to do that switch over. Always provide them with fresh water. I really recommend keeping everything as clean as possible, cleaning out your waters frequently. If you can, every day would be nice, and making sure that that's always good and fresh and available to them. For treats, scratch no more than 1/4 pound per 5 hens per day. You don't want them to get too fat. With their feed, you want to keep that out free choice. Make sure it doesn't get wet, which can cause mold and other issues. But you want to have their layer feed or their chick feed or whatever they're on. Their main diet can be free choice. But if you're giving them treats, limit the scratch. It's like candy to them. Table scraps. You want to make sure that you are giving them what they can eat in 20 minutes to avoid spoilage. So they really enjoy those table scraps and treats, grapes and watermelon and things like that. But you don't want to attract rodents or other critters, and you just don't want it to lay on the ground and rot. So don't give them a whole lot. And if they don't clean it up in 20 minutes, you need to clean it up and compost it or get rid of it. Okay, so again, here's just some ideas of feeders and prices and things like that for your chicks. Starting them out, they have these one piece. They're pretty long little feeders, and they're like $5.99 little plastic feeders. They have the metal ones that you can leave them like this, or you can actually attach the bottle to them, and they can serve as a feeder as well. And you can see like the water version of it over here. And then, for those of you that like to repurpose stuff or do it yourself projects, what can you make out of something laying around? I pulled these off of the internet. I mean, there's just all kinds of, do it yourself projects out there if you want to make your own waters or your own feeders. And for your waters, you want to make sure that you put marbles in there, because they actually can get in there and drown or have issues. The marbles also attract them to the water so that they learn to drink from that water. But it definitely does happen, unfortunately. So I recommend putting those bigger marbles in the water so they cannot get in there, they can't get wet, that sort of thing. All right. Okay, so once they become bigger, pullets or full-size chickens, you want to upgrade them and their equipment. So these are some of the bigger feeders that you can actually hang up. You really want these, you can have them on the ground. The problem is they will usually scratch out a lot of the feeder. They'll make a huge mess. So I recommend hanging them up where they can comfortably get it with their, kind of head level or chest level or that sort of thing. And that way they don't make such a mess, and they don't try to get in it, because chickens try to get in everything. And then, so they range from $14.99 to $20 or so, plastic versus metal, that sort of thing. And then, 1 gallon poultry drinker is usually good for a small flock, and they're $6.99. And also something to think about is the wintertime, they do make heated waters, so you don't have to constantly change out water. Another tip though is if you have a good coop and you feel good about it and you have electricity, you can actually run a brooder lamp out there to keep your water from freezing. You just have to be very, very careful, because again, there's so much stuff that can catch fire, and you've got cords and chickens and things like that. So it's only good for specific situations. But do think about how you're going to handle stuff in the winter time as far as when it comes to water. Okay, so housing. Once they are fully feathered, they can be transitioned into their own coop. Do not mix the young pullets with the older hens. If you must, do a slow and very safe introduction. Chickens have a very strong pecking order, and the older hens just go after these younger chickens and can cause so much stress and have them off feed and things like that. So I really recommend that if you've got an older flock, they stay together. And then if you've got a younger flock, and if you want both of them, that they have their own space. But if you are trying to integrate them together, what you can do is put the younger pullets in a cage inside of the older chicken's coop and let them kind of get to know each other that way for a little bit. And then one thing that usually works really well is when your older chickens are roosting at night, you can then take the younger ones and place them on the roost, and they all wake up together and they're like, hey, you know, we've been friends this whole time. So it typically works. And it's something you can try, but just don't force it. Make sure that you do it slowly if you're going to do that. But if you can, I would keep them separate. If you've got separate ages and that sort of thing. Space requirements. These are just some of the square footage requirements for inside and outside. So a minimum of 2.5 to 3.5 square feet per bird inside a coop if you're building a coop or that sort of thing. Minimum 4 to 5 square foot per bird outside. So this is really important if you're building a yard for them and they're not free range. You want to make sure there's adequate space for everybody in that yard. A minimum of 1 to 2 linear feet per bird for perches. So you want to make sure everybody has enough space. And then nest boxes, 1 per 4 to 5 hens. They need to be about 12 inches, about 14 inches with a board in the front to hold about 6 inches worth of nest material in there. No matter what you do, if you offer a lot of nest boxes, they're all going to fight over the same one. So it's a thing. They all just want to lay in the same one typically, but you want to make sure there are at least a few for them to pick from. Okay, so here's some different coops that I've ran across just in my experiences. This one it has the main coop back here, and it's got these different little yards that connect to it that they can move around, that sort of thing, to give the birds access out onto the ground. Chickens really do like to forage around and pick up bugs and things like that. And they can get like 15% of their diet from that if they've got adequate forage. But it's not the main part of their diet. You always still have to provide them with feed. So it can supplement them. And they do enjoy it. It's their natural behavior to be out, pecking and scratching around. This one, it's just for a couple of chickens, and it's so that they can move it around. There's nest boxes in there, and it's got really good cover on it, and they have a more permanent coop. This is kind of the one that they put them in to get them out on the grass. So you can see they've got their water there. They don't have feed in this one because it is a very temporary type of situation. They move them back to their other coop. This one is really cool. One of my 4-H families, this is their coop. They have been doing our 4-H poultry project. And I want to say these are the birds from that project. We did Rhode Island Reds one year. And that's another really good kind of all-purpose breed, really easygoing. But anyways, they built this little coop. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. The nest boxes are on the back. They can go and perch up here. They've got a little bit of a yard space. This is moved around frequently, so they get to a fresh piece of grass daily, and they're fertilizing that area. And this is actually in their cow pasture, so they're helping fertilize the cow pasture, which is pretty cool. And they've got their water jugs right here that travel along with them. This is on wheels. And they've got all their stuff inside there. So I just thought it was a neat little coop that they put together. You can make a coop out of so many different things. I've seen so many different types. And if you just do a Google search, you can see them. You can easily go purchase one, or you can look up plans or look up ideas to build your own. And they don't have to be anything real fancy or complicated. So for egg production, The young hens will start to lay at 16 to 24 weeks old. So a target is typically around 21 weeks old. For some of the breeds, it can be longer. Some of the breeds, it can be earlier. 12 hens will lay 9 or 10 eggs per day. So, you know, if you're like, I need, just a handful of eggs per week, you definitely don't want to go out and buy 20, chickens. So you kind of got to figure out, if I just want eggs for my family, how many eggs do you eat? How much do you want? That sort of thing. Or do you want to maybe sell some to a few people or have some for the neighbors or your other family members? That kind of gives you a gauge of how many eggs you can expect to get. Peak production is around 32 to 34 weeks of age. There is no rooster is needed to lay eggs, which is a great thing. Honestly, if you are not breeding chickens, do not have a rooster around. They're a pain. I have not met one yet that I've liked. There are some people out there that do, like their roosters and like having them around, but I don't suggest having them. They harass your chickens really bad, and they can cause some feather loss and some irritation, some, additional stress, not to mention they might come after you if they feel like it. So I wouldn't mess with one, if you're just wanting to have chickens for fun or have chickens for eggs and not breed. Most eggs are laid in the morning, usually by like 10, 11 a.m. So make a habit of going and checking the egg boxes first thing in the morning and getting them out, so that you reduce the risk of them, becoming broken or really dirty. The longer they sit in there, the more likely they are to break, which can cause bad habits for the chickens, a big mess. And then you don't want them to get really dirty, because if the eggs are really dirty, you've got to work on cleaning them before you can eat them. Egg production is based on daylight length. Every single year in the fall, I get questions. My chickens have stopped laying eggs. They look terrible. They're stressed, this and this. They go through molting. It is a natural process based off the daylight length. So they start slacking off on egg production, and they'll pretty much most of them will go to 0 egg production whenever they're in full molting. Some will still lay, they'll just back off significantly. They will, lose those feathers. They're going to work on regrowing the feathers. So you want to increase their protein during this time. And, just bear with them. They basically restart their body, and then they start laying again in the springtime once the day length starts to link them back out, or the daylight starts to link them back out. You can trick them with artificial light, but it's good for them to go through the natural process. So just expect, not as many eggs in the wintertime, and know that they're going to go through this. Okay, so I wanted to show y'all some pictures of some nesting boxes. Again, some ideas of ones that you can make yourself. So you can use these Rubbermaid tubs. I could think of a million ways to use these things, but you can use them for nesting boxes. You can, of course, build yourself some. This is just like some plywood. And then these are repurposing some little barrels, buckets, because they're smaller. And that works really, really well. You want to make sure that the nesting boxes are in a quiet, darker area. So like this one right here, one thing that I would do is maybe put up some like little curtains in front of it, or something like that, to help make it feel more safe and cozy. These over here seem to be pretty cozy. If you could get a hold of like a black bucket or a darker colored bucket, that would help. And then these seem to be facing quite a bit of sunlight, so again, you could drape something over them to kind of help make them a little bit darker. A lot of times in that perch area, you'll find the nesting boxes are going to be in there on the back side. So let me go back to the picture. Oh, hang on. Like this right here. So you can see that the nest boxes are on the back. So the chickens go in here to enter into the nest boxes, and it's really nice and quiet and kind of dark back there. That's what they really like. Okay. Oh, and I will say, you see that there's some eggs in here. These are actually dummy eggs. So if you want your chickens to know where to go and kind of want to get them started, you can purchase dummy eggs to get them started. You don't have to do that, or you could use golf balls or things like that. But if you're starting to find eggs like all over the place and they're not sure where to go, you can kind of help train them. Flock health, good management and sanitation goes a really, really long ways in preventing disease and issues and things like that. Keep the bedding dry. You don't want the bedding to become wet from, feces and urine and things like that. So make sure you're changing that bedding frequently. Make sure you're changing the nesting material frequently, keeping everything just as clean as possible. Proper ventilation, make sure there's cross ventilation and things are not shut up tight, even in the winter. So even if you are wrapping your coop with some plastic in the winter, do not make it airtight. You want to keep some flow of, the air, or they will get some respiratory issues from that. Make sure you're changing that water frequently. Provide fresh food, check that, and keep an eye out for sick birds. Isolate from the flock and treat for symptoms. So just some signs to look for sick chickens, because this is a big deal. You definitely want to notice this right away. Typically they go off feed. They're going to go off and be by themselves. You'll notice that they just don't look quite right. Their tail's droopy. A lot of times they'll have diarrhea or things like that. You can look for eyes are sleepy. The wings are kind of droopy. You can really see it good on this one right here. They're usually moving around pretty slow, but they just don't look perky and like a chicken. So you want to go ahead and isolate them. Make sure you do have a small cage already, like on your farm or at your house, so that when this comes up, you're not scrambling trying to figure out how you're going to separate this bird from the rest of your birds until you figure out what's going on. And at that point, you just want to examine the chicken. Again, does it have diarrhea? Does it have anything around its eyes, its nose? Is it coughing? Like, what is it doing? And then you can kind of go from there on figuring out what's wrong. Is it parasites? Do they have a respiratory infection? Do they have a more serious type of disease? There's definitely some resources online to kind of help you navigate maybe what they have based on the symptoms. But I'll tell you right now, there's like a million things that they can have. It's very frustrating. And we don't really have a lot of, veterinarians that do poultry work. We do have, and I'll make sure I include this link, NC State's vet school is now doing some small flock work. And so that might be an avenue if you need help, but do contact your veterinarian in your area. Sometimes they will talk you through a chicken case or see the chicken. So don't discount it unless you at least talk to them, reach out to some. If you don't know vets in your area, reach out to your extension agent. They are a great resource for everything I'm talking about, from sourcing chicks to, veterinarian, to where can I buy, feed, things like that, if you're looking for something specific. So your extension agents are very valuable. Okay, so for pest management, you're really concerned about the rodents, the wild birds, predators. Make sure you don't leave your feed, excess feed outside where they can get it. So don't just leave it in a trash can outside or in a bag outside. Make sure it's secured and locked down and maybe put into a shed or something like that. Use poultry netting, fencing to keep visitors out. If you have your birds free range, just know that they are open to predators, especially air predators. If you are doing like rotations with the electric net fencing, like if you're like rotationally moving them around with their coop, you can, a couple of tricks, you can put it in kind of a long, narrow run, and you can zigzag like baling twine or something over top of it. To an air predator, it looks complicated and they might not come down for a chicken. It's definitely not totally foolproof, but it's one thing that you can do. And if you have a permanent fenced in area, you want to make sure that it's, netting over the top. You might even want to bury the wire into the ground a little bit so stuff can't dig under. Just make sure that it's really predator proof on that. And, you know, stuff like avian influenza transmits from birds coming in, you know, waterfowl into ponds and things like that. So make sure that your backyard chickens do not have access around a pond where they might could pick up something like AI, which would be really devastating. So make sure you got a handle on where they are and what they're doing and that sort of thing. Make sure your coop is secure. You definitely don't want a snake getting in there or a fox or something like that. So make sure it's good and secure. For your internal, external parasites, you can actually see these, unlike disease. For the most part, you can see something going on. With the internal parasites, sometimes they will shed out, you know, a segment of like a tapeworm or something like that. Like sometimes you can see it in the feces and you're like, oh, you know, what's that? And it's probably something going on, you know, with an internal parasite. With external parasites, if you pick up your bird and examine them, you typically can see them on the bird, you know, lice, mites, things like that. Fleas. So if you have internal issues, and another thing I look for with internal parasites, they'll lose weight, they'll have diarrhea, things like that if they're really wormy. So you can deworm them. Just know that there's nothing labeled for laying hens, so you need to work with a veterinarian to have an off-label recommendation. And there's going to be a certain amount of time you're going to have to toss eggs. So I really recommend that you look to deworm in the fall, winter time when they're, you know, hardly laying eggs, things like that. You don't really have to toss, you know, several weeks worth of eggs, but work with your veterinarian on that because again, it's off label. Anything off the label has to be recommended by a veterinarian. For external, for like lice and mites, fleas, ticks, things like that, you can use an insecticide. You can go get that at your, you know, nearby farm supply store. And I was also going to say to, you know, clean your coop. They make coop disinfectants, coop cleaners. They also just make farm disinfectants and farm cleaners that are approved for buildings on farms and things like that and around livestock. So you want to make sure that you are cleaning down your coop and making sure you are disinfecting it, cleaning your equipment, making sure you're cleaning your boots, things like that. Think about biosecurity. Don't wear the same clothes that you do your chores in to the feed store. You don't want to pick up something at a feed store and you're coming back and then feeding your chickens in those same clothes and shoes. So just think about that. Don't share, you know, your poultry equipment with your neighbor. Don't invite everybody and the brother over to your place to look at your chickens and be in your chicken coop. You know, just be conscious. Stuff gets spread easily, as everybody is seeing with the current COVID-19 situation. So biosecurity is nothing new on livestock farms and poultry farms. So make sure that you are definitely doing your part on that. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go to the chat window for questions. Okay, so Devonna said the blue-green egg layers are attack birds when I feed them. So you're probably talking about the Americanas. I've met some nice Americanas, but there are some that are a little flightier than others. Mary Ann asked, what is scratch? So scratch is mainly, yeah, so Devonna answered that, corn and a few other grains. It is mainly an energy type supplement, so it's going to be mainly grains. It does usually have quite a bit of corn in it. Let's see, Marianne says, does change bedding frequently mean once a day, once a week, etc.? Does change water frequently mean once or twice a day? Change bedding frequently really is going to depend on how many birds you have. When you start to notice that it's becoming pretty soiled and it's getting kind of wet, that's when you need to. So it could be weekly. It could be every other week. Could be longer than that. And it just depends also on the size. You know, if it's a really small coop, it's going to get dirty quicker. And you're going to want to need to change that out more frequently. So unfortunately, it's a depends kind of thing. You're just going to have to watch it. As far as water, I would really recommend cleaning the waters and changing water every single day if you can. And, you know, you're talking usually about a 1 gallon, you know, water, because of the way that chickens drink water, they drop so much, you know, feed and debris and other things into that water to contaminate it. It gets dirty in a hurry. So I would, you know, the more you can clean it, the better. I mean, I'll just put it that way. Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Anybody else? And just put it in the chat window. I guess I was that thorough tonight, huh? Okay, well, just as a reminder, I will send out some, you know, handouts and resources, links, helpful websites, all kinds of good stuff after this, either tonight or tomorrow with the recording, and a really short little evaluation if you wouldn't mind completing that, just to let me know what you learned, and you know, if you have suggestions for future topics. And if you think of any other questions, don't hesitate to just email me. I'll be more than happy to help you out. If you need to get connected to your extension agent or other things like that, just reach out to me. All right, thank y'all so much. I hope you have a wonderful night.